She woke up early as she did every morning, her body still tired but her mind ready for the day ahead. Working as a nurse was not easy. Some days it felt like her efforts went unnoticed. Patients were grateful, but the world outside the hospital often treated people like her as invisible. She had learned to carry herself with quiet pride, knowing that her value wasn't measured by money or titles. She had dreams, small ones and big ones. Some people would call her ambitious, others naive, but she didn't mind. She had something in her heart that no one could take away. That morning, the hospital had been busier than usual. Patients needed extra care, forms piled up, and the senior nurses were rushing between rooms. She moved from one task to another, her hands steady even as her mind raced. She had learned early that nursing wasn't just about medicine or injections. It was about patience, kindness, and understanding. A smile at the right moment, a word of comfort, or even just sitting quietly with someone who was afraid could change everything. That was her gift. Not everyone noticed it, but she knew. And that knowledge kept her going. As the day wore on, she received a message that made her pause. It was from the hospital administration. There was an event happening in the evening, a charity fundraiser hosted by a wealthy businessman. They wanted her to assist. At first, she felt nervous. These events were full of people who looked down on her kind of work. People who had money, titles, and influence. People who often forgot that behind the uniforms and the humble roles were real humans with talents, feelings, and stories. She had been in such rooms before, had felt the cold stares, the quiet judgment, the assumptions made before she even opened her mouth. She knew she had to go. Her duty was her priority, and she couldn't let fear or pride hold her back. The venue was grand, the kind of place she had only seen on television or in magazines. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting light that danced across polished floors. Guests arrived in elegant dresses and suits, their laughter echoing through the halls. She felt out of place for a moment, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the luxury around her. But she straightened her back, reminding herself that she belonged here as much as anyone. Her purpose wasn't to impress, but to help, to assist, and to do her job with dignity. It wasn't long before she noticed him. The millionaire. Tall, sharply dressed, with an air of authority that made people around him defer instantly. But it wasn't just authority. It was arrogance, something she had learned to spot immediately. His eyes swept the room, assessing, judging, as though everyone else's worth was measurable by the size of their bank account or the brands they wore. And then he noticed her. A small smile appeared, but it was not friendly. It was the kind of smile that carried a challenge, almost a test. He approached, his footsteps deliberate, his posture confident. "So you're the nurse they've sent?" He said, his tone light but edged with something sharper. "I hope you don't mind taking directions. We can't have mistakes tonight." She met his gaze steadily. "I'll do my best," she said softly, but there was no hesitation. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. She could feel the eyes of the guests on them, sensing the tension. Sensing the silent game of power unfolding throughout the evening. She moved around, attending to tasks, making sure the event ran smoothly. But she noticed that he kept watching her. Every step, every gesture, every word she spoke seemed to invite a new judgment. She could hear whispers, questions directed at him about her, little comments meant to belittle her without saying it directly. She ignored them. She had learned long ago that reacting to arrogance only gives it power. Her focus was on the people she was helping, on the patients who were being honored at the fundraiser, on the children whose futures the charity supported. That was where her heart was. Not in the shallow opinions of someone who saw the world only through wealth and status. But then, as the evening progressed, it became clear that he had something else in mind. He wanted to put her in a position where she couldn't just quietly do her job. He wanted to humiliate her. It wasn't subtle. During a break in the program, he called her over in front of a large crowd. "I hear you have some talent," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Why don't you show us?" Let's see if a nurse can really do anything impressive." His words were wrapped in sarcasm, and the audience laughed politely, some nervously. She could see the amusement in their eyes, the expectation that she would fail. For a moment, her heart raced. A part of her wanted to walk away, to ignore him, to disappear into the background. But another part, the stronger part, knew she couldn't, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or mocked for who they were. She took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She remembered the countless hours she had spent at home, playing piano in silence, teaching herself pieces that no one had asked her to learn, perfecting her technique when no one was watching. This was the moment she had prepared for, even if she didn't know it. She nodded to him quietly. "I can play," she said simply. That was all she said. There was no arrogance, no need to prove anything with words. Just action. She walked toward the grand piano that stood in the corner of the hall, its polished surface gleaming under the chandelier lights. The crowd grew silent, curiosity and expectation hanging in the air like a tangible thing. Even the millionaire leaned forward slightly, his expression curious. Almost certain he was about to witness a disaster, she placed her fingers on the keys. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, with the first note, everything changed. The sound was clear, pure, and full of emotion. She played with a delicacy that made the notes shimmer and a strength that made them resonate. Each melody carried her story, the long days at the hospital, the quiet moments of perseverance, the strength she had cultivated in a world that often ignored people like her. The audience was captivated. People stopped talking, stopped moving, their attention entirely on her. Even the children in the charity program leaned forward, wide-eyed. The millionaire, once so confident, felt a jolt of surprise. He had expected mediocrity, something easy to mock. But this was extraordinary. Her music filled the room in a way that no status, no wealth, no privilege could match. It spoke to something deeper, something real. As she played, she didn't just perform notes. She told a story. She showed that talent isn't about where you come from, what you wear, or who you know. It's about dedication, passion, and heart. By the time she reached the end of the piece, the room erupted into applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, moved not just by the music, but by the courage it took to play it in the first place. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile, her eyes meeting those of the audience. Seeing admiration, respect, and even a touch of awe, the millionaire looked around, speechless. For the first time that evening, he felt something unfamiliar. Humility. He had tried to belittle her, to put her down in front of others, to prove that his world was superior. Instead, he had been shown a truth he hadn't expected. Talent, dedication, and integrity can't be measured by money. And in that moment, he realized that he had been wrong. She rose from the piano. Not triumphant, not gloating, but with quiet dignity. She had done what she came to do. She had shown the world a piece of herself, and it was enough. The applause continued, warm and sincere, and for the first time that day, she felt completely at peace. She had faced judgment, arrogance, and doubt, and she had met it all with grace and skill. And though the millionaire would eventually come to understand his mistake, that night belonged to her not to wealth, power, or status, but to the power of perseverance, heart, and talent. She walked away from the piano, back to her role as a nurse, her uniform once again visible to all. But now she carried with her more than the respect of the audience. She carried the quiet knowledge that she had faced the world and had not let it break her. She had shared her gift, not for recognition or applause, but because it was hers to share. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone present of a simple truth. True value can never be measured by money, titles, or influence. It is measured by heart, by courage, and by the willingness to stand tall even when the world expects you to fall. After her performance at the charity event, the room slowly began to settle. People whispered to one another, their expressions a mix of awe and surprise. The nurse moved quietly among them, her hands steady, her mind calm. She didn't seek attention, yet attention had found her in a way she had never experienced before. The applause, the smiles, the warm words of encouragement, It was all new, unfamiliar, but not entirely uncomfortable. She had worked her whole life for moments like this, even if she had never imagined it would come in this way. Despite the admiration around her, she couldn't ignore the millionaire's gaze. He stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, his usual air of arrogance replaced with a strange, almost uneasy silence. She could feel the weight of his eyes, not in judgment, but in something else, an acknowledgement of what he had underestimated. She had not spoken a single word to boast or explain herself, yet her music had said everything she needed it to. She had communicated her skill, her dedication, and her strength in a way that words could never fully capture. As the evening progressed, she continued her duties, assisting guests, helping with arrangements, and making sure that everything ran smoothly. People now looked at her differently, and she could feel it. Some nodded in respect, while others smiled warmly, as if seeing her true self for the first time. She noticed small gestures, a hand placed briefly on her shoulder in thanks, a quiet compliment exchanged in passing. These moments mattered to her far more than any public recognition. They were proof that human connection, sincerity, and skill could break through walls of prejudice and misunderstanding, yet she also knew that not everyone would be easily convinced. The millionaire, despite his evident shock, still carried a sense of pride that was not easily let go. She had touched him, unsettled him perhaps, but he was a man who measured success and value in numbers, deals, and influence. To fully reach him, she would need more than one performance, more than one night. But she didn't worry about that. Change, especially in someone like him, would take time. She could only control her actions and her attitude, and she was determined to do both with dignity. After the event ended, the nurse stepped outside for a moment to breathe. The cool night air brushed against her face, carrying the faint sounds of the city. It was a stark contrast to the warmth and opulence of the hall she had just left. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile. She felt tired, yes, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes after pouring your heart into something meaningful. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her efforts had not been in vain. Not only had she fulfilled her duties, but she had also shown the world a part of herself that had long been hidden, carefully protected, and sometimes doubted even by her. As she reflected, she couldn't help but think of her journey to this point. Nursing had not been her only dream. She had always loved music. Even as a child, she had been drawn to the piano, fascinated by the way a few notes could create a story, evoke emotion, and move people. But life had not been easy. Money had been tight, responsibilities many, and opportunities few. Her parents had worked tirelessly, struggling to provide basic necessities, and she had learned early that her dreams would have to wait behind the reality of survival. Yet she never let go of music completely. She practiced in secret, at odd hours, sometimes sacrificing sleep, sometimes stealing moments during quiet afternoons. The piano had become her companion, her escape, and her silent teacher. That evening had reminded her why she had persevered. It was more than just talent, it was the culmination of years of patience, practice, and dedication. Each note she had played carried a piece of her soul, and the audience had felt it. That realization was both humbling and empowering. She understood now that her gifts were not meant to remain hidden forever. They could touch people, influence them, and perhaps even change minds. And though she did not perform for recognition, the thought that her music had left an impact filled her with quiet pride. As she walked back inside the hall to gather her belongings, she noticed a few people lingering, waiting to speak to her. A young woman approached first. She was one of the patient's family members, and her eyes were wide with admiration. "I've never heard anything like that," she said softly. You made me feel something I can't explain." "Thank you." The nurse nodded, smiling gently. "I'm glad," she replied. "That's what music is for. To connect, even if just for a moment." The family member's smile lingered, and she left feeling lighter, her heart warmed by the genuine emotion she had sparked. Another person approached, a man who worked in event management. "Your performance was incredible," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "I've seen many musicians, but the way you played, It was different, honest, real. I don't know how to explain it, but it was beautiful. She thanked him politely, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. These weren't flattery or empty words. They were sincere reactions to something she had shared freely and wholeheartedly. She finally turned toward the millionaire, who had been watching from a distance. Their eyes met, and for a long moment neither spoke. There was no hostility, no condescension, this time only a quiet tension, a mutual understanding that something significant had just happened. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect, and she nodded in return. She did not need more than that. Recognition from him was not her goal, but acknowledgement of what she had achieved, even silently, mattered. It was proof that she had not only held her ground, but had risen above the attempt to belittle her. Later that night, after the last guest had left, she returned to her small apartment. It was modest, far from the grandeur of the hall, but it was hers, a space filled with memories, personal items, and the quiet presence of her piano. She walked over to it, running her fingers lightly over the keys. She didn't play, she didn't need to. The music of the evening still lingered in her mind, echoing softly in her heart. It had been more than just a performance. It had been a statement, a declaration that talent, heart, and perseverance mattered more than wealth, status, or arrogance. As she sat in the stillness of her room, she reflected on the evening. She thought of the faces of the people she had touched, of the brief but meaningful connection she had created through her music. She thought of the millionaire, and how even someone so powerful could learn a lesson in humility if they were willing to see. And she thought of herself, and the quiet pride she felt in not letting fear or doubt control her. That pride, she realized, was more valuable than any applause, any recognition, or any praise. Her thoughts wandered to the future. She knew that this evening would not change the world overnight. There would still be people who judged her, people who doubted her, people who tried to diminish her worth. But she also knew that she had the power to continue proving herself, not through confrontation, but through action, through talent, and through integrity. She could continue to serve as a nurse, touching lives quietly and sincerely, and she could continue to share her music, reaching hearts in ways words often could not. In that balance, she found her strength, a combination of humility and confidence, compassion and determination. She allowed herself a small smile and finally leaned back in her chair. The city outside was quiet now, a soft hum of distant lights and occasional car engines. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patience, new responsibilities. But she felt ready. She had faced judgment and arrogance, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own worth. She understood that true respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned, silently and steadily, through patience, talent, and integrity. And she knew she had already begun that journey. The nurse glanced once more at the piano, feeling a surge of gratitude. It had been her secret companion for years, a source of comfort and joy, and now it had helped her speak to the world in a way nothing else could. She made a quiet promise to herself. She would never let her talent remain hidden again. She would continue to nurture it, to allow it to grow, and to use it to inspire, to connect, and to touch lives. She understood now that her music, like her work as a nurse, was a gift, and gifts were meant to be shared. Even if the world initially doubted their worth. As she turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, she felt a sense of calm and purpose settle over her. The evening had been challenging, yes, but it had also been transformative. She had faced arrogance, judgment, and doubt, and she had responded not with anger, but with skill, grace, and heart. That was her true victory. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, ready to embrace whatever the next day would bring, knowing that she was stronger, braver, and more capable than ever before. The next morning, the nurse woke up feeling a mix of exhaustion and quiet excitement. The previous night had been unforgettable, yet life did not pause for applause or recognition. Patients awaited her care, schedules needed to be followed, and responsibilities piled up as always. But she carried herself with a new confidence now, a subtle sense that she had crossed an invisible line. She had shared something deeply personal with the world, and the world had responded. That realization filled her with a quiet, steady energy that made her steps feel lighter as she moved through the hospital halls. As she entered the ward, patients greeted her with their usual smiles, some sleepy, some anxious, but all trusting. She moved from bed to bed, her touch gentle, her words calm, reassuring. She knew that her music had touched not just strangers at the charity event, but also the patients she cared for daily. Music, like kindness, had the power to reach hearts in ways words often could not. She thought about this as she administered medicine, adjusted pillows, and checked charts. Her hands were steady, her mind focused, and yet there was a spark inside her, an awareness that the world beyond these walls had just begun to notice her. Meanwhile, news of her performance had begun to spread. Social media posts from the charity event circulated quietly, featuring her playing the piano, though many did not know her name. People were commenting on the beauty of her performance, the emotion in her music, the undeniable skill she possessed. The nurse had not sought attention, and yet it was finding her. She didn't dwell on this too much. Her focus remained on her patients. Still, she could not ignore the subtle changes around her. Staff members smiled more openly. Strangers acknowledged her with respect. And even some of the more arrogant guests at the charity event sent messages praising her talent. She had just finished tending to a young patient when a message arrived on her phone. It was from the event organizer, inviting her to another gathering, a special fundraising dinner in a more exclusive circle. The note was polite but clear. Her presence was requested, and they hoped she would play the piano again. She read it carefully, feeling the familiar flutter of nervous anticipation. This time, it would be different. The audience would be more influential, more critical. The millionaire who had attempted to humiliate her would likely be there. The thought made her stomach twist slightly, but she quickly reminded herself that fear had no place, where courage was required. She spent the rest of the day preparing mentally. Her duties at the hospital were demanding, but she carved out moments to practice on her small old piano at home. Her fingers danced over the keys, running through melodies that she hoped would convey not just her skill, but her heart. She played with intention, with feeling, imagining the audience's reactions, imagining herself standing tall despite the pressure. It wasn't just about performing. It was about showing in the most authentic way she could that her worth was not defined by status, wealth, or the opinions of those who tried to put her down. The evening of the dinner arrived, and with it a mixture of anticipation and tension. The venue was even grander than the previous event, a historic mansion with tall windows, gleaming chandeliers, and tables set with the finest silverware. Guests arrived dressed in elegant attire, their laughter echoing through the halls. She could feel their eyes on her as she entered, sensing curiosity, skepticism, and expectation. Some nodded politely, others whispered among themselves. She held her head high, allowing herself only a small, quiet smile. She had faced judgment before, and she knew that it was how she responded that would define the evening. And then, as she walked toward the piano, she saw him. The millionaire. His posture was more rigid than the night before, his expression serious, and there was a certain tension in the air around him. He had witnessed her talent once, and now he was confronting it again, perhaps trying to regain a sense of control or authority. She could sense his inner conflict. He was not used to being unsettled, and yet here he was, forced to acknowledge someone he had assumed he could dominate. She did not fear him, nor did she seek revenge. She simply understood that her music was a force that could speak louder than words. Taking her seat at the grand piano, she closed her eyes for a brief moment. She let her hands hover above the keys, feeling the weight of expectation, of curiosity, and even of judgment pressing in on her. And then, slowly, she began to play. The first notes were soft, deliberate, carrying a tenderness that immediately captured attention. She allowed the music to flow naturally, guiding it with emotion, with precision, and with a story that unfolded without a single spoken word. Each note was a reflection of her journey, the struggles she had faced, the perseverance she had cultivated, and the strength that had grown within her over the years. The audience was mesmerized. Conversations ceased, glasses paused mid-air, and eyes fixed on her as if drawn by an invisible force. Her music filled the room with a richness and depth that transcended wealth, power, and status. It was a universal language, speaking directly to the hearts of everyone present. Even the millionaire, who had attempted to undermine her the night before, was visibly affected. His confident demeanor softened, his eyes reflecting a mix of awe, regret, and humility. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that talent and value cannot be measured by social standing alone. As the piece continued, she allowed herself to fully express the emotions she had carried for so long. There was joy, sorrow, hope, and resilience in every note. She played not for recognition, not for applause, but because it was her truth, her voice, and her gift. The audience felt it. Some eyes glistened with tears, others widened with amazement. There was a shared understanding in the room, a recognition that what they were witnessing was authentic, heartfelt, and extraordinary. Her music had bridged the gap between them, reminding everyone that talent, dedication, and humanity could speak louder than arrogance, wealth, or judgment. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. It was spontaneous, heartfelt, and sustained. People stood, cheering, clapping, and smiling. The millionaire's expression had changed completely. There was no trace of arrogance or condescension. He had been humbled, confronted with a truth he had not anticipated. He had tried to assert superiority, to diminish her worth, but she had responded not with words but with grace, talent, and unwavering self-confidence. It was a lesson in humility, and he could not ignore it. The nurse stood from the piano, bowing slightly to acknowledge the audience, her expression calm yet radiant. She did not boast, did not gloat. Her victory was not in proving someone wrong, but in showing the truth of her own skill and character. The applause continued, and she allowed herself a brief moment to absorb it, feeling a warmth and satisfaction that came from genuine recognition. For the first time, she understood that her music could not only express her emotions but also inspire respect, admiration, and understanding in others. After the performance, as people approached her to offer congratulations, she felt a profound sense of connection. Strangers shared their thoughts and feelings, expressing how deeply they had been moved. Some spoke of personal struggles, others of gratitude for her courage in the face of judgment. Each interaction reinforced the realization that her gift was not just a talent, it was a bridge, a way to touch hearts and change perceptions. She listened, responded with kindness, and allowed herself to feel the impact of her actions. It was humbling, yet empowering, and she cherished every moment. Later, the millionaire approached her. This time, there was no mockery, no challenge, no attempt to belittle her. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition that she had surpassed expectations not just of him, but of everyone in the room. He extended his hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. She shook it politely, understanding that it was not about revenge or triumph, but about mutual recognition and respect. She had faced someone powerful and arrogant, and had emerged with dignity, skill, and heart intact. As the evening concluded, she left the mansion with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond applause or praise. She had faced judgment, intimidation, and doubt, and had responded with authenticity, courage, and talent. Her music had spoken for her when words could not, and it had left a lasting impression on everyone present. She realized that her journey was far from over. But this night had proven to her and to others that perseverance, dedication, and integrity could break through even the strongest walls of prejudice and arrogance. Walking back to her apartment later that night, she reflected on the evening. She thought about her patients, her colleagues, and the countless people who had doubted her along the way. She thought about her music, her quiet practices in the middle of the night, and the moments she had sacrificed for her dream. And she realized that every struggle, every sacrifice, every small act of perseverance had led to this moment. She had shown the world her true self, and it had responded with admiration and respect. Sitting by her piano once more, she allowed herself a few quiet moments of reflection. The keys were familiar under her fingers, a comforting presence in the stillness of the night. She did not play, for she did not need to. The memory of the evening, the applause, and the reactions of those she had touched were enough. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she... The next morning, the nurse woke up feeling a mix of calm and anticipation. The evening at the grand mansion had left an impression, not just on the guests but on herself as well. She still carried a sense of pride, quiet but firm, knowing she had faced judgment and emerged with dignity. Yet she also understood that admiration and applause were not the ultimate measure of success. What mattered most was staying true to herself, to her work, and to her passion. She had touched lives through her music. And she had also reminded herself why she continued to be a nurse: to care, to help, and to make a difference in ways big and small. At the hospital, her day began as usual. Patients needed her attention, charts had to be updated, medicines administered, and delicate situations handled with patience and care. She moved through the ward with quiet efficiency, her mind balancing tasks and responsibilities while her heart still carried the echo of the piano notes from the previous night. There were moments when she would pause, recalling the looks on the faces of the audience, the surprise, the admiration, the emotion. It was a powerful reminder that her efforts, her talent, and her perseverance had not gone unnoticed. Even in a world that often overlooked people like her, recognition could still be earned through authenticity and skill. By midday, news had spread further. Some of the staff whispered about her performance at the dinner, exchanging impressed glances. Others mentioned that influential guests had been deeply moved by her music. She overheard fragments of conversations praising her talent, though she remained focused on her patients. Praise was welcome, but it was not her goal. She had learned long ago that true satisfaction came from doing her work well and following her heart, not from the opinions of others. Still, the quiet recognition lifted her spirits, reminding her that her dedication was worth something beyond personal fulfillment. It had the power to inspire and to affect those around her. Later in the day, she received an unexpected message. The millionaire who had attempted to humiliate her wanted to speak with her. Her first instinct was hesitation. She remembered his arrogance, the way he had tried to assert power and diminish her. But then she remembered the way she had responded with dignity, skill, and quiet confidence. She realized that this meeting could be another opportunity, not for confrontation, but for understanding, perhaps even for closure. Taking a deep breath, she agreed to meet him at a small, quiet cafe, somewhere private enough to avoid the attention of the public or media. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table. His usual air of arrogance was tempered with something different, this time something she hadn't seen before. It was not humility exactly, but a form of respect mixed with reflection. He looked at her as she approached, and for a moment there was silence. Neither spoke, only the quiet sound of cups and the occasional clink of silverware. Then he gestured to the seat across from him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said finally, his voice measured. "I wanted to talk to you. Not about last night, but about what happened there." She nodded, listening carefully, her expression calm. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm willing to listen." He hesitated, gathering his thoughts. "I misjudged you," he admitted. "I assumed that someone in your position, someone without wealth, without influence, could not possibly have what it takes to impress or to move people. I wanted to test that, to see if you were capable, and I was wrong." "Completely wrong?" Her eyes softened slightly, but she remained composed. She had expected some form of acknowledgement eventually, but hearing it so directly was still surprising. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate you saying that." He leaned back, clearly struggling with his next words. "Watching you perform. It wasn't just talent. It was passion, dedication, heart. Something I've seen little of in my world. I underestimated you, and I wanted to say I regret that." She allowed herself a small smile. "We all make mistakes," she said. "But what matters is what we do after realizing them." He nodded slowly, a quiet humility in his posture. "I see that now. And I want to learn, I suppose. To understand that there are things in life, people, talents, values, that money cannot buy and influence cannot control. You have shown me that, and I Thank you for it. The nurse felt a warmth in her chest. This was not about proving him wrong anymore. It was about seeing a person begin to understand something fundamental, something that could change the way he approached the world. She realized that sometimes victories were not loud or public, they were quiet, personal, and deeply meaningful. Her music had been a bridge, and now this conversation was another step in crossing the gap that arrogance and privilege had built. For a while, they spoke quietly, sharing thoughts on life, responsibility, and the meaning of success. She spoke about her work as a nurse, the challenges, the rewards, the moments when she felt most fulfilled. He listened, asking questions, showing genuine interest rather than judgment. He shared glimpses of his own life, his experiences with business, influence, and social expectation, and she listened without interruption, offering perspective only when asked. The conversation was rare, honest, and human, a true connection that went beyond social roles or status. As the afternoon wore on, she realized that this encounter had been more significant than any applause or recognition. It was a step toward understanding, a subtle shift in perception. The millionaire had attempted to diminish her, to assert superiority, but instead, he had been confronted with authenticity, skill, and grace. He had begun to learn a lesson in humility, and she had done it not with anger, but through who she was and what she could do. It was a reminder that the greatest influence often comes from quiet strength and unwavering integrity, not confrontation or conflict. Returning to her apartment later, she reflected on the meeting. She felt a sense of calm and accomplishment. The conversation had been more powerful than she expected, not because it changed him entirely, but because it confirmed something within herself. She had faced someone who wielded wealth and influence as power, and she had responded with courage, talent, and heart. She had maintained her dignity, shared her gift, and allowed her actions to speak louder than words. And, in doing so, she had created an opportunity for someone to see the world differently, if only in a small way. That evening she sat by her piano, allowing her fingers to move over the keys. She didn't play a full piece, but she ran through melodies, letting her emotions guide her hands. She thought about the patients she had cared for, the people she had touched with her music, and the silent impact of her actions. She realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt, and every effort she had made to persevere had led to this point. Her music was more than talent, it was a testament to her resilience, her compassion, and her unwavering belief in herself. As the notes filled her small apartment, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more people who might underestimate her, and more situations that would test her resolve. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them, the skill to overcome them, and the heart to inspire and touch others along the way. Her journey was ongoing, and each step was a reminder that true value comes from integrity, perseverance, and the courage to remain authentic. No matter the circumstances, the nurse's thoughts then returned to the millionaire. She understood that true change, especially in someone like him, would not happen overnight. But she had planted a seed of understanding, a small shift in perspective that might grow over time. And she realized that this was enough. Sometimes the most powerful victories were not public displays of triumph, but quiet moments of influence where actions and authenticity spoke louder than words. Judgment or privilege. As the night grew deeper, she reflected on the lessons she had learned through her music, her work, and the challenges she had faced. She understood that life would continue to present obstacles, but her response to them would define her. By remaining true to herself, by nurturing her talent, and by carrying herself with grace and humility, she could continue to impact lives in ways she had never imagined. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from recognition or reward, but from knowing that she had faced adversity and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in her abilities. Finally, she allowed herself to rest, her mind filled with a sense of quiet accomplishment and hope. She had not only proven her skill and heart to the world, but she had also shown herself what she was capable of. And in that realization she found peace. The challenges would continue, but so would her strength, resilience, and dedication. And she knew, deep within her, that her music, her work, and her unwavering spirit would continue to touch lives, inspire respect, and bridge the gaps that arrogance, judgment, and privilege often created. The hall was still buzzing with excitement long after the nurse finished her final note. People were talking in soft voices, smiling at her, and even clapping again whenever they caught sight of her. She didn't know where to look or how to react. Everything felt unreal, as if she had stepped into someone else's life for a moment. A few minutes ago, she had been standing quietly in a corner, trying to stay invisible. Now everyone seemed to know her. Everyone wanted to thank her. Some even wanted to touch her hand as if she was someone special. She stood there with her heart still beating fast, her fingers warm from playing the piano. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. At work, she usually walked through crowded hospital hallways without anyone noticing her. Patients appreciated her, but even then, they usually saw her as just another person in uniform who gave medicine, checked temperatures, and changed bandages. She never expected applause for doing what she loved. She never expected to be celebrated for something that felt so personal, something that had always been a quiet part of her life. As she stood near the piano, she saw the millionaire walking toward her. His expression had completely changed. Earlier, his eyes had been sharp with pride and arrogance. Now they looked unsure, almost shaken. He took small steps, as if he wasn't sure how to approach her. It was the first time all evening that his confidence seemed to have cracked. The nurse felt a tiny twist in her stomach. She didn't want confrontation. She didn't want more attention. She just wanted to breathe again, maybe sit down somewhere quiet. But the millionaire kept walking toward her until he finally stopped right in front of her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The crowd continued murmuring in the background. She could hear soft laughter, footsteps, glasses clinking. But between the two of them there was only silence. Finally, the millionaire took a deep breath and spoke. His voice was much softer than before. "I owe you an apology." She blinked, surprised. She had never expected those words from him. Not after the way he had treated her earlier. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed silent and let him continue. "I misjudged you," he said, looking down for a moment, "and I did it in front of everyone. I thought I understood who you were just by looking at your clothes and your job, and that was my mistake." The nurse didn't speak immediately. She didn't want to embarrass him, but she also didn't want to pretend that everything was fine. His words earlier had hurt. Being judged like that always hurt, no matter how strong someone tried to be. "You didn't know me," she finally said, keeping her tone calm. "But still, you shouldn't talk to anyone like that." Her words weren't sharp or angry. They were simple and honest. And that honesty made them even more powerful. The millionaire nodded slowly, accepting what she said. "You're right," he replied. "I shouldn't have. And I'm sorry." He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pretending. For the first time that night, he looked human, just another person who was capable of making mistakes. She gave him a small nod. She wasn't someone who held grudges. She saw mistakes every day in the hospital. She saw people at their most vulnerable moments. She knew how complicated human emotions could be. Accepting his apology didn't mean she forgot what he did, but it meant she chose not to carry anger with her. After that, the millionaire stepped aside, letting others come forward. A group of guests walked toward her with bright smiles and clapping hands. One of the older women placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and told her she had never heard a more heartfelt performance. Another guest said the nurse's playing reminded him of a concert he had seen years ago. Only this time, it felt more emotional and pure. Someone else said her music brought tears to their eyes. The nurse felt overwhelmed, but in a warm and comforting way. She kept thanking them quietly, smiling shyly, unsure of how to handle so much praise at once. Soon, the event organizers approached her and asked if she would be willing to perform again at future events. She didn't know what to say at first. She wasn't a professional musician. She didn't have training, certificates, or fancy clothes. She had only her old keyboard at home, which she played at night after long shifts. But the organizers seemed genuinely impressed, and they weren't pressuring her. They simply wanted her to know she had a gift worth sharing. "I'll think about it," she said softly. They nodded and told her they would be honored to have her again. Eventually, people began leaving the hall. The lights dimmed, the noise slowly faded, and the evening came to an end. The nurse finally got a moment of peace and sat down in a quiet corner. She stared at her hands, still surprised by how steady they felt. Those same hands that cleaned wounds and held sick patients had just played music that touched a room full of strangers. She remembered something her mother used to say when she was younger. Your talent is not meant to stay hidden. Even if only one person hears you, let them hear your heart. For years, she didn't believe that. She thought music was just her private escape. But tonight proved something she never allowed herself to imagine: her gift could reach people, move them, inspire them. After sitting for a few minutes, she stood up and decided to leave. As she walked toward the exit, she noticed the millionaire standing near the door. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't laughing or smiling the way he had earlier. He seemed to be lost in his thoughts. When he saw her walking by, he stepped forward. "Thank you again," he said gently. "Your performance. It changed the whole evening." "It changed me too." She nodded, appreciating the sincerity in his voice. She didn't need him to praise her. She didn't need his approval. But knowing that her music had made him reflect, that meant something. "I hope you treat people better from now on." She replied in a steady voice. "I will," he said. And this time, she believed him. The nurse walked out into the cool night air. The sky was dark but calm, sprinkled with stars. She took a long breath, letting the fresh air fill her chest. She felt lighter than she had in weeks. Something inside her had shifted. Not because of the millionaire, not because of the applause, but because she had finally allowed herself to be seen, not as just a nurse, not as someone from a humble background, but as a person with a story, with talents, with dreams. The next morning, she returned to the hospital as usual. Nothing looked different. The same hallways, the same beeping machines, the same early morning rush. But she felt different, more confident, more sure of who she was. Her coworkers greeted her normally, completely unaware of what had happened the night before. She smiled to herself. She didn't need them to know. She didn't need anyone to treat her like a star. Her music had done what it needed to do. It reminded her of her own worth. She carried that feeling quietly inside her as she checked charts, spoke with patients, and did her daily rounds. Later that day, one of the patients asked why she looked so bright that morning. The nurse simply smiled and said, "Nothing special. Just a good night." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was a turning point. A moment she would remember for the rest of her life. She didn't know where her music would take her in the future. Maybe she would play at more events. Maybe she would teach children someday. Maybe she would simply continue playing for herself late at night when the world felt quiet. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she no longer saw her talent as something small or hidden. She walked through the hospital with a calm confidence she had never felt before. The millionaire's attempt to put her down had turned into something completely different: her chance to rise, her chance to show her true self, and her chance to remind others that dignity and talent have nothing to do with money or status. She had not only surprised the entire room, she had surprised herself, and from that day forward, she carried her music not just in her hands but in her heart, ready to share it whenever the world needed a little more light,